that's a difficult one to kind of answer in a very short piece. Amjid is a Bristolian, born and bred. Um, Used to be in Islamic finance, worked for HSBC for 26 years. Great time. It was one of the kind of pinnacle moments of my life in terms of my career, building my network of contacts and establishing myself as who I am and what I'm capable of doing. As a family man, I'm a husband, I'm a father to a mashallah beautiful 16-year-old daughter who's just finished her GCSEs. I have family based in Bristol, do a lot of work in the community, and now having retired from the bank for nearly 8 years now, I've kept myself busy by doing a lot of work in the community, working with key stakeholders like the NHS, the police, Crown Prosecution Service, just giving something back in terms of how I could help support them better engage with our Muslim colleagues up and down the country. So alhamdulillah, I feel privileged and honoured that I've been able to do that and give something back. Well, to be honest, Islamic finance, I didn't know much about it until it was probably the late 90s that I'd come across an article that was an overview of Brother Iqbal Khan, and it was talking about the work that he'd done in Islamic finance around, much more corporate level, buying and selling of aircraft, etc. Well, that's interesting, that's different. So I didn't have any real technical knowledge of what Islamic finance was. Throughout my career, I'd spent most of it in retail banking, as I said, through the branch network, spent a short amount of time in business banking, and then moved into electronic banking services and wealth management. So it was very much customer focused, customer centric. So when I read that article, and I thought, I've got to do a little bit of homework about this. This sounds interesting. Got to plan out the rest of my career now with the bank. What can we do? So once I'd read up about it, and it was very basic knowledge, and where there was nothing, to say I was a technical expert by the time, I applied for the opportunity. But it was just to get a basic understanding. And I knew the concept of riba, but it was only then when I truly looked at it that I realized from an Islamic perspective the consequences of participating in a riba-based economy and riba-based banking. And that did actually make me feel a sense of responsibility to change the direction of travel in my career, that maybe I should move away from the conventional side and focus on that. And alhamdulillah, the first opportunity came up when the bank had announced it was going to launch into Islamic finance, and there was an outreach internally where they reached out to our divisional manager asking, did we know anybody locally who might be able to help in raising the profile of this proposition? And that's when the area manager approached me and said, oh, Amjid, you're a Muslim, what do you think? And I just kind of snapped at the idea. I thought, this is fantastic.
In that early period in the 80s and the 90s, how was riba perceived by and understood by the Muslim community in Britain?
I think the best way to answer that, Umar, is if I take myself as an example. All right, I'm born and raised in this country. My Islamic education came from going to the mosque, learning to read the Quran and all of the fundamentals of our faith, and how we should practice those in our daily life. And for most of us, in our generation, we would say that, it's you learn the basics and you tend to stick with that and do your best. When the concept of riba was raised, for me, as I said before, that was something that I had to investigate. And even the fact that I'd learnt 6 chapters off by heart of the Quran by the age of 12, I actually hadn't learnt all of the kind of context behind what I'd learnt off by heart. And for me, it was like going back to basics and reading through the text, as well as the sources around the hadith, as well around the issue of riba, and getting my understanding around it. So if that was the case for me, somebody working in the banking industry, having clear knowledge of what finance is about, how would it be for our general community? And what we found was very simply that when we first reached out to the community and said, we have a product that is branded as being Sharia compliant, the question was, well, what do you mean? What makes it different? And then prove to me that it is indeed Sharia compliant. And not being a scholar, being able to do that is very, very difficult. So for me, it was a case of my mindset from the very outset was, I'm not here to preach Islam. I'm here to provide a product that's based on Sharia principles. Where Sharia compliance is concerned, then we've got to go directly to the sources. And in that case, our scholars at that time were internationally based, which made it more difficult. But I'm pleased to say that, to be honest, with the fact that we now have the internet, we have all of this information available immediately at your fingertips, a lot of our customers came to the table with a significant amount of information. They'd done their homework, they researched the topic, they were asking pertinent questions. And for many of us in the team, it was about making sure we were upskilled enough to be able to address those questions in the right way and providing the information in a way that people felt that we were being transparent about the whole process. So alhamdulillah, I think it was challenging at the beginning, but within a period of about 6 months, the conversations actually changed from prove to me it was compliant to tell me what mode of finance do you use and how much will it cost. So the concept of the Sharia compliance bit actually diminished, and the issue of price comparability then became more of the conversation going forward.
Very interesting.
Well, for me, it was a challenge. The honest answer is it was a challenge because all of the scholars that HSBC at that time had on its board were internationally based. We had the highly respected and renowned authoritative Sharia scholar Sheikh Taqi Usmani from Pakistan. We had Sheikh Nizam Yaqubi from the Middle East, as well as Dr. Muhammad Ali Al-Ghari. And none of these were actually known to me or I'd come across before. So I had to do my homework around them. And what I found when I read up about their background and their history and then learning, what gave me the comfort and reassurance was the fact that it wasn't just theologically based information that they were providing. They had a strong background in finance, in economics, in business. They understood the finance sector really well and had a proven track record in that. And that for me was really important in terms of making sure that, knowing that, I was able to relay that onto our customers to say that in terms of the validity under Sharia compliance, HSBC itself has gone out to independent, authoritative individuals and figures that are respected and renowned for their skills around providing compliance wrappers on products that are based on financial services. And I think, Omar, as you know, without that, then being able to talk to your clients and customers confidently that you're giving them the right service, especially when you know that it's based on, for them, akhirah. It's about, am I doing the right thing to protect me on the day of judgment? Inherently, I had to have that confidence and belief that we were doing the right thing. So, at the time, it was sold out of the branch network, and that was your senior clerks on mortgages. So, most of them were non-Muslim. And you can imagine when customers were coming in and asking questions around ijara, musharaka, mudaraba, that terminology in itself was difficult to digest and understand. And then also saying to me, well, my imam is saying this, my scholar is saying that. To be honest, I felt it was too much for our local colleagues. And alhamdulillah, the bank did listen, my peers did listen. And then I was given the opportunity to actually take on the role of head of Amanah in the UK. And at that time, when I was offered the opportunity, I thought, is this real? Is this, are they serious? Are they? But there was a change in dynamic. There were people moving on, and they said, look, based on your experience, we'd like you to take this on. And I was given almost a blank sheet of paper at that time to say, right, how would you relaunch this proposition? And for me, that was really what I needed. I needed to be able to kind of pull things back in and consolidate what we had done. So kind of pulling it back from the branch network where it was, and then build that back up and create these centers of excellence. By creating the centers of excellence, by recruiting and in engaging people that were right, that I felt were right for the community and right for the role in terms of delivery, engagement, and building trust and confidence. So we went from a team of about 5 to a team of 23 Amanah managers right across the UK in these centres of excellence. And then based on the fact that I wanted to ensure that the service provision was just as seamless as it was across the mortgage network, we built the same infrastructure behind it. The fortunate thing with HSBC is we had that huge wraparound to do that. There were some areas, Omar, if I was to say to you that the Amanah managers were doing more business than the local mortgage manager in the same location, that tells you the impact that it had. And bearing in mind that the fee structure or the cost structure of Amanah Home Finance at the time, it was one of the most competitive products on the market, even compared to conventional mortgages. So it wasn't exclusively for Muslims. So you can imagine the growth numbers weren't substantial. It wasn't in anywhere in comparison to the mortgage growth model. But for a home finance, we were seeing exponential growth year on year. So we were doubling our mortgage or home finance book year on year. The time I spent working in this environment and the people I was engaging with on a day-to-day basis, it would have been mad if it didn't happen, but it increased my iman, okay, most definitely. I felt that, the brotherly love, the fact that I was giving something back, I was actually helping our community with the practicing of their faith. It gave me a sense of well-being internally. I felt emotionally collected with my community, my customers, and I was prepared to bend over backwards for them as much as I could in order to help them as best as we could within the framework of the remit of the role and the remit of the product and the regulations. But there was that a degree of empathy, that degree of emotional connection, that we were doing something good that was benefiting all of our Muslim colleagues and communities, and I've never had that in any other job that I've done, and I think hand on heart say all of the team felt that way. I know when I left the organization and a number of others did at the same time, and it felt like we'd lost a limb. It was actually that's how much we were attached to this business. And the fact that most people, when they would talk about HSBC when it came to Muslims, regrettably, the word HSBC didn't come into it. It was just Amanah. The word Amanah stood out much more prominently than the word HSBC. And the fact is that Muslim connection, that fact that we were doing something to give something back, I think stood us in good stead. And it gave us a sense of worthiness, and that we were giving something back to our community. There were a number of people that had no banking experience whatsoever that I took on purely because of what they said to me in the interview around why they wanted to do this, why they wanted to do this in terms of giving something back to the community. And that was really the essence of it all. And I think our customers picked up on that in terms of when they met with the team. I remember one example. You may well laugh at this and you may even think, hang on a second, how did that work? But when we first started off, I had a colleague in Bristol. And at the time, I live in Bristol. I was probably the one and only Muslim in the Bristol area for about 10 years of my career. So when I had to find somebody to take on the role of an Amanah manager in Bristol, there weren't many Muslims I could turn to. So we had one person who was part of the kind of sales network, and his name was Marcus Bacon. And lovely chap, he would come to the events with us. He was really passionate. I loved working with the Muslim community. So, that for me was great. But I had somebody called Bacon selling halal finance. And I remember him once, he rang me after a customer appointment, and it was in the month of Ramadan. And he rang me up and he said, Amjid, I've just seen a customer. And there was a bit of nervousness in his voice, and I'm listening to him and thinking, oh my God, what's happened? And I said, how did it go? And he goes, I just wanted to tell you, I've serviced this customer. They're taking the product, But at the end of the meeting, as you said, I wished them Ramadan Mubarak. And I said, I hope you have a happy Eid. And they jumped across the table and hugged me. And I said, well, there you go. And so I remember doing an interview, I think it was with The Guardian, and I was quoted as saying, halal bacon sells Islamic finance. And, alhamdulillah, look, I was, as I said, sometimes Allah puts people in your path that you never expect. I suppose two things come to mind. The recognition and being invited to Washington as a Muslim entrepreneur, being quoted in the speech by Hillary Clinton at the closing session to say that, we have Amjid from the UK who's done this work in Islamic finance. It was nice to be recognized, bearing in mind there was a global audience there. And I suppose the second was when we did the 10th anniversary event in London to mark the anniversary of HSBC, Amanah globally. And London was picked as one of the host events. And I was, privileged to be able to stand up on stage and at the end do the closing remarks. And the fact that when I finished my remarks, everyone got off their chairs and came to the stage to thank me was, in recognition of the fact that we'd given something back to the community. So, alhamdulillah, that I took on behalf of the whole team, that was the thank you to everybody who's worked so hard behind the scenes, up and down the country, and not just the people in Amanah directly in the work in the frontline sales team, but all of the people working in the mortgage center that were servicing our product. That was recognition for them. The people in head office who had supported us throughout the marketing campaigns. So I suppose the lowest moment was the fact that being kind of a fledgling business within such a giant organization such as HSBC, we were always competing for resource in terms of time to develop products, the marketing support, etc. Those are things that, as a business, you've got to make your pitch, and it then gets prioritized in accordance with everything else. And that was kind of a constant theme throughout my time in HSBC Amanah here in the UK. But I don't think I was alone in that as a head of a product. Talking to my peer group colleagues at the same time, we were all in the same boat. But being such a small fledgling business at the time, it was a challenge. And I suppose the kind of pinch point came when the rules around Basel changed and it became 100% risk weighted because of the asset backed element of the product. And that then kind of had negative consequences for us here in the UK. Because we were growing so fast, we were doubling our book almost year on year. That meant that the bank had to keep that amount of capital sat doing nothing. And that became a much harder sell in order to secure the capital to continue the growth of the business based on the margins that we were charging as a product. And in order to keep it price competitive, one thing I didn't want to do was to up the rate in terms of the rental charge, because I felt then it would be penalizing our customers for wanting to practice their faith. Well, I suppose for me, if I look at what's happened to me since I've left the bank, most people know now, but didn't know then at the time when I was head of Amanah, that I was on dialysis at the time. Okay, I'd suffered kidney failure a year after starting at the bank, and that kind of limited my mindset at the beginning in terms of what can I do with my career, where will I go, will I have the same opportunities presented to me, will things work out? And as you know, I spent 23 and a half years on dialysis before I had a successful transplant, and I had that in 2011, which is a year before I left the bank. And I left the bank for a genuine reason that, it was on medical advice. It's in your interest to take things easy. So that's why I stepped down from the role that I was doing. But for me, throughout that time, it was a sense of, there are challenges in life. Everyone is faced with problems. But as Muslims, we live by certain principles, and one of them is the fact that we know that our time will come. Allah puts things in our way to test us, and I'm reminded of a verse, and it's one of the bits of the closing remarks that I did at the 10th anniversary when I was talking to a delegation of 200 odd people, and I said to them, from what drives me is the simple verse, ayat in the Quran in Surah Rahman, which is repeated 34 times, and that's فَبِأَيِّ آلَاهِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, which of the favors of your Lord will ye deny? And that was what I was saying to the community, is that despite everything, this is a favor from Allah to us, and it's up to us to accept what we do with it and what we make of it. So this was my attempt at giving you something back, and hopefully that it will add value to you. And that's the kind of principle that I've lived my life by. Pick a career that you feel, or a vocation that means something to you, that you feel that you're giving something back, that gives you a sense of self-worth and value. Just as I said about when I was going to work, I didn't feel like I was going to work because I knew I was doing something right that benefited my community from a faith perspective, and was giving them a sense of well-being in themselves. So I would say to anybody that, look, find something that you're passionate about, that you feel is adding value. That's most important above all. From my experience at HSBC, for me, if we're offering a proposition, then it has to be end to end. That we can't just be offering piecemeal products to our customers to say, well, this bit of your financial services is Sharia compliant, but by the way, the rest of it you're going to have to do in the conventional method. I think in some way, perhaps disingenuous is not the right word, but I can understand from the banking point of view, you can't deliver all the products in one go. There's a cost element to that, and you've got to look at whether or not it's a viable option and a sustainable one at the same time. But I think the community here in the UK, the Muslim community, deserves a provider who is able to come in and offer that end-to-end service proposition. And that's really, really important. But I think we need to consolidate the talent base around that in order to be able to deliver that effectively. I think one of the risks that we run as a community is that everyone wants to be top dog. And the fact is, if we have too many players in the market, not only do you dilute the opportunity, but also then you dilute the talent to be able to develop the proposition further, because they're stretched in terms of what they're doing.
Do you feel the customers expected something beyond just a compliance badge, or were they just happy with that as long as it was priced effectively?
Yeah. If we go back to the early 2004-05, when home finance was being offered by HSBC, it was very much a case of what mode of finance are you using and how much will it cost. Okay, there were very few that asked questions around the ethical aspect. The ethical question came in when we launched the Amanah pension fund. Okay, and with the Amanah pension fund, obviously we had to demonstrate and prove that we weren't investing in areas that were non-Sharia compliant. So things like pornography, alcohol, armaments, things like that. All of those things were off the books and weren't permitted. So those questions were being probed and being asked. As to whether or not it fed into this whole kind of circle of ethics and operating in an ethical manner, that wasn't something at that time that was at the forefront of everyone's mind. It's much more so now, and I think the conversations that I've had with the younger elements of our community, younger age groups, but I'm talking about 20 plus, just coming out of university, who are talking about, I need to be thinking about buying a home, looking at finance, looking at that. They are asking those questions as to, if I go with XYZ provider, how do they operate? Do they have this kind of consciousness around, are they doing much more for the wider community in the way that they offer the product? So I think the conversation has moved on, and that's because, the kind of aspirations of the younger generations coming through have moved on.
To what extent, Amjad, would you say that the industry follows the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law?
In my days, it was both. And I can give you a real life example of that. Is that when we first launched in the UK, we were launched on the principle of ijara. And then the rules around double stamp duty changed about the transfer of ownership on a monthly basis. And the government re-looked at that and said, well, the scholars are saying they want to move to a diminishing musharaka product, but for that to be a true diminishing musharaka, that there would have to be a physical transfer of ownership month on month, and that would accrue a stamp duty implication if it wasn't resolved. And HSBC was at the forefront of leading conversations with the government and the FSA in order to move that agenda forward. And Sheikh Taqi Usmani at the time was saying to us, look, if this product is now been signed off and the law changes, then in order to have my sign off, you have to move to that model at the earliest opportunity. And I'm pleased to say that's exactly what we did. So for me at the time, both the letter and the spirit was combined in one. That I felt personally that we have to be guided by our independent authoritative guides who are the scholars, and if we want to maintain the trust and confidence of our customers, then we've got to do what they tell us. Where do I see it in 20 years? Well, how long's a piece of string? Where do we see the conventional banking system going in 20 years? What we know is what's fundamentally clear is that technology is playing a fundamental and key role in the development of all industry sectors. I now know, I very rarely go into a branch, but when I was in branch banking back in the late 80s, Corn Street branch in Bristol was kind of regarded as a hub branch. We had over 100 people working in that branch. You could now walk into a branch of that size and there'd probably be a skeleton staff of about 5 or 6. Everything else is automated. So everything now is moving towards the customer making an informed decision using technology. Okay? Perhaps that's where something that the Islamic finance industry needs to be looking at. Is it, are we moving through the process of how retail banking evolved on the conventional side before we adopt the technology aspects? Or perhaps we could, or the Islamic finance sector could learn from what's changed already and be a faster mover in that sector. The other thing I think needs to be considered and explored is is a branch network actually required? If you look at another example, First Direct, telephone banking service, as I said, many people now, very rarely, I never go into a branch. It's been 8 years since I left the bank. I think I've been into a branch twice. So I would hope that the Islamic finance industry moves in line with the development of technology. I hope that providers consider this as not as being offering products in piecemeal, but end to end. And I also would like to see the fact that everyone, men and women, being given equal status in leading this business going forward. It's been quite a male-dominated industry sector. As you know from my personal life journey around the issue of organ donation, this is something that I felt I could give something back in terms of, while I was waiting on dialysis for 23.5 years and running HSBC Amanah, I never felt as an individual that I could openly talk about the fact that I needed a kidney transplant. Not many people knew, outside of my immediate team and key people in the community that I had regular contact with, that I was, undergoing regular dialysis treatment as well as working. So I felt voiceless in a sense. And having now come out of the other end with a successful transplant that was donated to me by a family member, my nephew, may Allah give him reward for this, that in this life and the hereafter. Without that sacrifice, I wouldn't be here today. I felt I had to give something back in that regard and help NHS Blood and Transplant understand the importance of the role of faith, and particularly around this issue of whether or not it's permissible to be an organ donor. And for the last 6 years, I've been working with the likes of Mufti Muhammad Zubair Butt and many other scholars, Maulana Yunus Dudwala, Dr. Rafaqat Rashid, others, so many to go through. But all of them have influenced the way that I've understood about the role of faith and how important it is to engage the scholarly community in the right way and to provide them with a platform to be able to have that dialogue and discussion. And alhamdulillah, only last week we announced the release of an updated religious edict on organ donation, and we've had a whole comms plan set up behind that, which is based on the model of how I engage the Muslim community on Islamic finance. It's about that attitudinal segmentation. It's about reaching out to those aspects of our community who are already kind of inclined to your understanding of the challenge and are much more receptive to the message than perhaps others who rely on a faith leader or a scholar to say to them, no, that's the right thing to do. So that for me, Omar, has been fundamental. I've used the word fundamental, so it's been absolutely at the core of what I've been doing in terms of helping other statutory stakeholders and partners understand how to gauge Muslim communities. Similarly, the work that I've been doing with the police is all around community engagement. As a community, we're faced with a rise in hate crime. That's an important agenda for all of the constabularies up and down the country. And, they're all working at a different pace, but my local constabulary is fully committed to ensuring that it understands what is the best way to engage the community. And again, I chair the Strategic Independent Advisory Group. I've done a bit of commissioned work for the constabulary as well around behaviour change. And that is about how do you engage your audience rather than going to your regular go-to gatekeepers, who are the community stakeholders that are the ones that get the message out, who engage and make sure change happens. So those are the things, Omar, that I've had the honour and privilege of leading and supporting our statutory partners with.